My name is Rory Rodgers. I'm 34 years old and I live in Prineville, Oregon. Well, I was raised on a cattle ranch down in southern Oregon, a little town called Klamath Falls. Man, had the dream life of a child, you know, roping and riding and driving equipment and motorcycles and hanging out with my large family. Grew up in a home that valued Jesus and had two parents that, man, just discipled me as a young boy to love Jesus. Lived on the ranch until elementary school, about third grade, when my father decided to go back to veterinary school. And so we ended up in Corvallis, Oregon, where he went to Oregon State. And a little more of my city life began in Corvallis. Okay, so this is all part of my year-long training for Nepal. Part of what I do is I throw on this bad boy, which is a training mask, and it helps train my lungs for high altitude climbing, getting a better VO2 max and getting the most oxygen I can out of every breath. So about every time I hop on the stair climber, I wear this, and it restricts how much air I can suck in at a time. I have it set at a 12,000 foot mountain experience. So then I hop on. I just purchased this off of Craigslist. My other one broke. And so not every morning I come down here for 30 minutes and ride this. It's going kind of slow right now. And it gets hot and it gets sweaty. And I build up a lot of nastiness in the mask. And I wear a pack with 40 to 50 pounds in it. And I can look out my window here at a mountain, and I pray for the people of the Himalayas, that God would train my body to be able to climb the mountains and reach them with the good news of the gospel. So that's part of the daily routine. Corvallis as a fourth grader was a culture shock, not only being in a big city, but being off the ranch. And culture shock was compounded 100-fold when we found out that my dad had Hodgkin's disease. My mom told the great testimony of God's faithfulness in the midst of dad's cancer when she shared. You can listen to her testimonial right here, Cindy Rodgers' story. But for me, when my dad, who was my hero, was diagnosed with cancer, it was a very scary time as a fifth grader. And my dad, he was 3-time state champion wrestler at Henley High School, wrestled for Washington State University. He was buff, cut, good looking, smart, cowboy, could rope and ride with the best of them. And now he's got something that's knocked him on his back. Not only knocked him on his back, but him and my mom had to go to Stanford University for a bone marrow transplant for him. And so I was separated from him. I was scared, my grades dropped. And even after the bone marrow transplant, we heard that he'd have reoccurrence after reoccurrence. And to hear that as a kid, that dad might die, I remember running from the family meetings where we were told this and diving on my bed and screaming and wailing in terror. One day, Dad was told that he was actually going to die. He had tumors all over his body. It was time to pack up and go home, settle your estate. And Dad said, "That's not what God has told me." So we went to a local church and he was prayed over and he was miraculously healed that day. All the tumors were gone. The doctor didn't know how that happened, but for me at a young age, I knew that God had healed him. And so that was incredible for my life to see a powerful God move in such a way. So when I graduated high school, I went to the School of Ministry that Calvary Chapel Corvallis put on and was equipped to become a pastor. And it was halfway through this year of training that my dad had a stroke. And long story short is I had to quit School of Ministry and go live in a RV outside of the hospital in Bend, Oregon, and basically help him with his recovery. He'd lost most of his functions of his body and his left side motor functions, and so had to help train him how to use those things again. And but it was to not much avail, as about 2 months later he passed away and went home to be with Jesus. And it was at his funeral that I got to preach the gospel, and some 40 people responded to put their faith in Jesus as my father had. And I didn't know what to do with my life after that point. I'd quit school of ministry. My dad had just passed away. And this beautiful blonde girl came to my dad's funeral, who'd I'd known since my childhood. And she told me that she was going to Oregon State to be a cheerleader. And that's when I decided, well, I'm going back to Corvallis to go to school, and I'm gonna follow this girl. And that, of course, became my wife, Lindsay. And just a fun little tidbit is that when my dad had Hodgkin's disease, I found out that her and her mom sold flowers on Mother's Day to help pay for my dad's bone marrow transplant. And so that would be a special thing that we would hold together as we got married and had a family together. So at the same time that Lindsay and I began dating, I became the youth pastor at Calvary Chapel, Corvallis. And this was special because it was the very youth group where the Lord had set my heart on fire for him. And now I had the privilege of training up disciples at the same youth group that I was trained up in. For 7 years, I had discipleship groups with these kids and preached the word, went through the whole New Testament with them, put on a couple camps a year where we'd get away to seek his face and go to Brazil and go to Mexico. And man, it's one of the most rich times in my life, until the Lord said, it's time to move out of Corvallis and to go plant a church or be a lead pastor somewhere. Through a lot of fasting and praying, God opened up an incredible door to Prineville, Oregon, right in the center heart of Oregon.
Let's hop in Cisco and head on out to the farm.
Prineville was amazing. It's an open door from God for our family.
We call these road sodas in Prineville. Yeah!
It is a community that is getting me back to my roots.
Sweet home Prineville.
It's country, it's cowboy, and hard-working, blue-collar men and women. The church that I came to is called Calvary Chapel of Crook County. It is a healthy church. The people love each other. Small town, small church. We are in each other's lives regularly throughout the day. It's hard to escape each other living in such a small town. God really has used that to help facilitate local church discipleship and pouring into each other's lives. God had given our church some great vision on how to grow in community with one another and grow as disciples together through small core group fellowship times and writing our own curriculum and things like that to grow as followers of Jesus. And yet the whole time we had sensed that maybe we weren't all that we could be for the global purposes of God, and that we were a bit inward focused here in this small country town. And so God moved our church to fast and to pray about how to change this. And he really spoke to our hearts that just keep focusing on local discipleship, and I'm going to do a move in my own time that'll not be attributed to anybody else or anyone else's vision. It'll be a work of the Spirit, and it will be obvious. And in 2014, after our whole church prayed and fasted for a global mindset to break us out of our short-sightedness as ranchers and farmers and hard-working country folk that have our little acreage and our little animals and just our properties and things, but he would lift our eyes up to see the world. And God sent us right after the fast to a missions conference in Alabama, where he opened up a Book of Acts style door to the end of the world, literally other side of the world and as high up as you can get, into the Himalaya mountains of Nepal. And it was at this conference that we learned about unreached people groups and unengaged people groups, and how local bodies have been designed by God to be sending platforms to get the good news of the gospel to unreached people in remote countries. And so we came back with this heart-stirring, robust view of God's heart for the globe, and we shared it with our church. And within about a 2-week period, the climate of our church changed and became hot for global evangelism, to where all of our resources, all of our time, all of our families, all of our energy, and all of our local discipleship would be turned to go and get the good news of the gospel to the farthest parts of the world. It was really a work of the Holy Spirit. No one could say that it was something that we had done. He just changed us in a matter of a couple of weeks, to where you have Prineville men that would say, I'm never leaving America, never plan on it, never will, and so leave me alone. And now they've gone to Nepal, and they feel like God would call maybe their families to go be a part of world evangelism. Just a complete change of heart. And so in that time, this guy walking down here right now is one of these men that I'm talking about. And now he's training right now, going on a hike to take the gospel to Nepal, the high up Himalayan villages, in January with me. And so God helped us develop a vision statement for our church, taken from Scripture, to see the heart of God in the Old and New Testament. Our vision statement is that we exist to make disciples in our city and of all nations who are sent out to proclaim and embody the gospel of Jesus Christ for the glory of God. So everything we do as a church falls under the umbrella of our vision statement. All of our resources, finances, how we do discipleship, how we do midweek studies, how we do core groups, how is it going to help further the goal of God for the nations to hear and see the gospel lived out. And so that is something that God has done in our town, of changing us from thinking that the blessings of God end with me in my local home, but rather the blessings of God are to fuel me to get out and take His saving knowledge to the hostile, remote, scary places in the globe. That's the vision God's given us. That's our future in Prineville at Calvary Chapel. That's my family's heart. We'll stay here in Oregon as long as He wants to use us as a tool here to get people there. Or we'll go there if that's what He wants. But our lives are blank checks, and we just say, Lord, write them to the amount You want and where You want.
So the organization we're with in Nepal is called the Footstool Project. You can click on a link right here to it. And they exist to exalt Christ at the highest points of the world. And there are 329 different people groups in Nepal, and only 9 of them have ever heard the gospel. So many of the people groups in different tribes and languages are in the little nooks and crannies in these giant Himalayan mountains. And so the Footstool Project exists to climb up and trek in and get in those crevices where villages are, who in 2,000 years have never heard of Jesus. They don't know His name, they don't know what the cross is, but God has gone ahead of us and prepared their hearts to hear of how to be forgiven of their sins and how to be reconciled to their Creator. So I encourage you to check out the Footstool Project.